I was driving in the mountains of Northern California with Domingo, who I've been mentoring since he was a wee little guy, 8 years old, and now he's 18. And so I took him to California to stay with Seth's parents, who are awesome. But I took him as a graduation gift. And so as we're driving, we started kind of reminiscing about the past decade of our lives together. And I started telling him this story, reminding him of a story that had happened that he kind of didn't really remember the details of. But basically, when he was 9, his mom found some Pokemon cards that he had stolen from Wal-mart. And so when I came over to have our hangout time, she was like, "Here you go, you're the man in his life, so you take care of this." And so I gathered him into the car, and we're driving to Walmart, and I wasn't ready, I guess, maybe I was. I didn't feel ready to do this kind of thing, but that you've seen that on the TV shows, right? That kind of thing. So I asked Domingo on the way, what do you think we're going to do? And he said, "You're going to make me go in and tell them what I did and say I'm sorry." And I think I thought yes, and I said no. I'm going to go in with the cards, and I'm going to give them to the people, and I'm just going to take responsibility for it. And whatever negative consequences come, I'll take that. And so then it's just silent in the car. And he's 9 years old. I think he might have even asked me if I was going to go to jail. But I was like, whatever, it's not going to be that big of a deal. So we go in, and he came with me, went to customer service, and I gave the lady the cards, and I said, "I'm sorry, these cards were not paid for." And she just took them, and she didn't care at all. She was like, "Okay, thank you." And so we left rather unceremoniously, and we're walking out, and then I see the golden arches of glory. And so I turned into McDonald's, and I was like, "Domingo, what kind of McFlurry would you like?" And Domingo doesn't say anything, and I think he didn't even come inside, McDonald's. He was just standing there. And so I ordered, just some McFlurry, I don't know, with like crushed up M&Ms and freaking, everything that I could put on there. And I took it to him, gave it to him, and he was just standing there in Walmart, and he said, "Why do I get ice cream?" And I said, "'Cause that's what God does." And when I was telling him that story in California, I noticed that he was like wiping tears. Yeah. It's, that's what God does. Is that what you believe that God does? You sin, He pays for it, and you get ice cream. You sin, He pays for it, and you get ice cream. That should maybe bristle you a little bit. I had to practice saying that a bunch of times, and I'd say, "No, okay, is that really what it says in here? Is that how it works?" How about the more you sin, the more He pays for it, the more ice cream you get? That's just Romans 5, where sin increases, grace abounds. And then Paul later on has to say, he has to address the obvious next question. Well, should we sin more so that we get blessed more? And he says, don't even think that. But that's how good God is. That's why grace is so good. And I think that we as a Western church, and even this church, we get that we sinned. And we get that He paid for it. But we've started calling that grace. And then we're missing the ice cream altogether. We've started calling the mercy grace. The mercy is forgiving you, but God has more. He has more for you. He wants to bless you above. He wants to do more. He wants to give you the ice cream. He wants you to be dumbfounded by his goodness. He wants you to be, can we repurpose the word God-smacked? He wants you to be dumbfounded like Domingo was just dumbfounded with that ice cream. Like, why? What? And in the car, 10 years later, Domingo said, after I reminded him of that story, he said, I don't like that. And I was like, Domingo, I was like, well, why don't you like that? He said, because I don't deserve that. And I was like, that is Christianity. That feeling is Christianity. What did you think it was? Like being good and making sure other people are good? It's about just being dumbfounded by how good God is. And I really want everybody to have that ice cream moment. Because it was Domingo's sin that opened that door. It was his sin being brought to the light that made it possible for me to take that from him. And it was him sticking around to get the ice cream. And so I don't want us as a church to drag ourselves around thinking, well, God forgave me, but then he ran out, and I'm just trying to keep up now with this God who he forgave me, but he certainly doesn't have anything more for me. And I think it's that grace moment, that getting the ice cream moment, that makes you grateful, makes you just lets that gratitude well up, and that gratitude is the heart of worship. And like I said earlier, it's that gratitude that is the door, kicks the door open, and the Holy Spirit comes in, and you become powerful. In fact, you know what Domingo actually said after I said, Domingo, that is Christianity? He said, that makes me want to go and do good things for God. I'm like, that is the gospel. So when you were feeling guilty and you wanted to do more prayer, that's fine. That's okay. But it's if you get propelled, launched into doing more for God because of the grace, that's the gospel. That's where we want to land. And I don't know how to make that happen. And this sermon is not a sermon for unbelievers. Even though I'm talking all about confession of sin, this is a sermon for believers. I had been a Christian for maybe close to 15 years before I really ever had this kind of ice cream moment. Actually, it was before I really ever felt like I was down going in through that low door. A lot of you know that I lost my job this time last year, and I got hired miraculously at Little Elm ISD to teach English. And I worked there for 3 weeks, and I could not make it past 3 weeks, and I quit. And this was a particularly heavy, sort of grave failure for me personally, because I had said things to myself, maybe to others, that I felt like I could weather anything through prayer and worship and a relationship with God. And then here, teaching we have lots of teachers here. I couldn't weather that with all the prayer and worship that I could muster. So it just felt particularly crushing. And then to make it even worse, at the school, I knew from the very beginning that I didn't want to teach, I didn't want to stay there. So I just had no filter for sharing the gospel with people. I was like, maybe if I share the gospel, they'll fire me and I'll be free from this thing. So there was a kid, two kids that sat on the opposite side of class in this one class that I had that made it very clear that they were my enemy, that they were not going to do what I said. On the first day, that class would actually stay in the classroom for 20 minutes after class for some sort of dead period. I don't know. The one of the kids who was really clearly I'm not doing anything. When I would try to cajole the other students into writing something, he would like somehow project even more that I'm really not doing anything. And so after that first class, he came up to me for some reason. We started talking, and he told me his life story. First day of school. And as the days went on, he would tell me things like, "You're the only teacher I can talk to. You're really cool. I feel like you get me." He told me about how he'd been abandoned by his dad. And he said I was one of the only teachers he could talk to, or the only teacher he could talk to. Then the other person, a girl, she was kind of like the leader of this gang, so to say, of maybe three other girls, and she was really not having it. And after a couple of days, I went up to her to ask her how she was doing, because I had heard that maybe her boyfriend had broken up with her or something, and she was sleeping. This was during the off-period class, and her friends were like, don't wake her up. So I just went back to the front. Well, anyway, she came up to the front after that and was like, "You wanted to talk to me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I had heard her say once the word church in the most like cultural Christian kind of way possible. But I was like, "Hey, I heard that you said something about church. Do you mind if I pray for you?" She was like, "Okay." And I was like, "Can I pray for you right here, right now?" The rest of the class was sitting out there, but they were talking. It was their off period. And she was like, "Okay." And I was like, "All right, just leave your eyes open. I'll leave my eyes open, and people will just think we're talking." And so I prayed for her, and like a moment happened. And she felt it, and she knew something had happened, and she didn't want to leave up there talking to me. And then the next day, she was right there in the front of class with her two cronies beside her, and they were taking notes. I mean, it was instantaneous transformation. And then one day, I wasn't there. And that one kid had told me about how his dad had abandoned him. And I, feel like I did the same thing. I mean, I made a decision for me over them, for what I needed over what they needed. And I had talked to a lot of you. A lot of you knew how hard of a time I was having. I talked to Ross. I was just looking for help, and he told me, there's an honorable way to quit. You don't have to work there. There's an honorable way to quit. And I was like, okay. And I couldn't pull that off. I just quit. I just didn't show up again. And that was a Friday. And that Saturday, my dad drove me up to Little Elm to my classroom, and I just went in and I took everything that I could hold in my hands, and I went home, And I left a bunch of stuff behind. Brittany's microwave that she gave to me, it was a casualty. And then the next day was Sunday, and I had to come to church where, a lot of people knew what I was going through, and they were praying for me. And, I really did not want to go to church. But all my Christian training said, that's where you've got to be on a day like this. You've got to be there. And so I came to church, and that was the first time I had ever done anything with church where I felt like I didn't have anything to bring, where I didn't have anything that God would want if I came, or anything that you guys would want, and or let alone need. Like, I had always felt needed by the church, but now I felt like my wagon was tied up behind everybody, and you guys were pulling me. And I felt like that day, the wheels were off entirely, and I was just, being dragged. But I came, and I talked to two people who had suffered a lot. One person whose family had fallen apart, another guy who had lost a child, and I knew that they had something that they had learned from God in the quiet, in the agony, and I was going to go get that from them. And they did. They ministered the gospel to me, and you guys ministered the gospel to me. And the question that I had that day is a question that I ask a lot, and I want you guys to ask it. And it was, God, is your gospel good enough for me? I know it's good enough for everybody else, but what about me? Does it work for me? Will this work for me?